Good morning. I wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk about moving into the option part of a mediation process. From a time perspective, you're probably 30, 45 minutes into the mediation. If it's a really tough mediation, you might be a little bit further into it. Just to put it in the sequence of kind of what you've done so far, and again, remember this isn't just linear, it doesn't lay itself out really nice, step one, step two, step three. It sort of is spinning maybe all of the time, or maybe that's not a good analogy, but it's like you do part of one thing and then you come back and you see if there's any pieces you need to pick up, and then you reach out and you grab for some more and get a little further, and then you come back and see if there's any pieces you pick up. By that I mean you move through your opening, your storytelling, you move through positions to interest. We talked about how critical and how important that stage was. You get to a spot where you're able to talk about a topic list. You're able to say, so we've sat and talked about this for a while. I've listened to both of you explain your perspectives. Here's some of the more important pieces that I took from our conversation. These are the pieces I think we've got to make sure that we get resolved. And I want to check just to make sure that I got them all, that we're all on the same page when it comes to that. That's sort of your topic list piece. That's sort of your transition from merely sharing perspectives, talking about positions and interest. You do that step well, and the parties are going to be at a spot where they're ready to move to solutions, options, ideas. I don't want to call them solutions for the parties quite yet, because I don't want to have to determine, is this a good solution? Is this a workable solution? Is this a completely crazy idea that isn't going to work? What I really want to do is I want to create a safe place. I want to create the opportunity for the parties to talk openly, honestly, about what they think might work. We're not going to test them. We're not going to evaluate them at this point. We're trying to come up with ideas. And so you're going to hear people throw out bits and pieces of ideas. You're going to hear people throw out, wait, I've thought about this for a week now. Here's what I think. And you're going to hear them kind of go into a lengthy explanation. It comes in all kinds of different ways. Doesn't matter. What you're hoping when you get done with the option generating piece, and by this whole sort of spinning that I'm talking about, you'll be in the option generation phase as such. But you'll still reach back and listen. Did you get all the interest? Did you miss something? Did another piece that needs to be attended to sort of come out when you were talking about options? Doesn't happen all the time. Isn't a big deal, but at least listen for it. So we move into the option generating part. I want to end up with a reasonable pile of options on my table. They're going to look partly formed, partly thought through, completely formed, completely thought through, bits and pieces. I'm okay with that, perfectly okay with that. I want a pile. And the next time we talk about the next stage of mediation, we really move into how do we separate that out? How do we make decisions? How do we make commitments? Because it's perfectly fine to talk about, well, I might do this or I could do that. It's another thing to say, okay, I'll do that. I'll make a commitment. And that's the next stage. Right now, we're just trying to come up with ideas. And so the PowerPoint that I gave you does a pretty succinct job of going through, what is it, probably 10 different tools. They're not complicated tools. They're not, scientific wonders. They're just basic communication tools that's doing one thing. It's forcing the people you're working with to look at that problem in a different way. They've looked at that problem from their perspective, from their shoes, from their chair for days, weeks. It's not uncommon for us to work with people who have been fighting about these things for years. And they've looked at it and it always looks the same, and they think the solution should always be the same, and they're stuck. Your job is to pick that up, whatever it is, you pick that up and you figure out a way to turn it, to shift it, so that they see it differently than they saw it yesterday. And they see a different facet, they see a different perspective, they see a different possibility. And that's your job. And so there's 10 tools here. You're going to like some of them and you'll use them all the time. You're going to look at others and you're going to try them and you're going to go, nah, that's not for me. The whole goal is taking each one of those issues, each one of those positions that you've moved into an issue, and then holding those issues up and going, let's talk about what we can do to this. And you do that in different ways. You look down through that list. Sometimes it's a building block approach. That's a pretty common one, probably one you'll use most of the time, because people, when they go into conflict, it's like this huge elephant. And you know the saying, you can't eat an elephant all at once, but you can eat it a bite at a time. And a lot of times people look at conflict like that gigantic big elephant that they can't even get their arms wrapped around. Your job, break it up in pieces. Make it manageable. Say, let's work with this first. Let's not even think about what that might look like. Let's just work at this. And you help them take it in bits and pieces. Agreement in principle, that's one you don't use as often. That one is where the parties are just sort of antagonistic and arguing and fighting, and they're certain they have nothing in common. It's hard for them to sit at the table, and they just want to poke at each other, and you find a way to grab an agreement in principle, a fairly high level. So both of you would agree that no matter what solution we come up with, it has to address the quality of life, and it has to ensure a reasonable quality of life for both of you. You can agree with that, right? Something about helping people see that they do have some pieces in common is really helpful for them moving forward, for them moving out of that us-them perspective. Fact and fiction, always. People come to their conflict going, this is the truth. This is the way it happened. I know exactly. Well, you know what? It's not necessarily the way you think you saw it. And so how do I, without making them feel stupid, without making them feel like they're dishonest or deceitful, without devaluing their opinion, their perspective, how do I figure out a way to go, when you say the teenage kids always drive too fast up and down the road and that they're a danger to the community, tell me more about that. I mean, is it one or two kids? Is it, how do I take a sort of a generality, a big perspective, presumption, that they've built a lot of their feeling and emotion on, and how do I sort of figure out what's really going on? How do I separate fact from fiction? Play with that one a little bit. That one's an important one. You'll use it. Organizing and summarizing. You've seen that slide before. It's straightforward. In this context, it's really helpful for prioritizing and sort of putting things in some kind of manageable order. Again, quick, easy, in and out tool. Creative questions. Questions are always great, but questions are hard. There's a lot of people who don't know how to ask questions. And so if you can figure out how to ask really good questions, you're already ahead of the game. Brainstorming, I don't like brainstorming so well because I think people use that for a shortcut. They go, oh, let's brainstorm about this, and everybody stands there and stares at each other and they don't know exactly what that means. So if you're going to use brainstorming, I want you to follow the sort of setup. You got to lay it out right. You've got to set the expectations out right. Reviewing the trip, that's when people get, 2/3 of the way through, they've solved, 4 out of 7 things. They're tired, they've worked hard, they're ready to quit. They want to just throw their stuff down and walk away. And this is where you say, wait a minute. Let's just take a minute. Let's go back and let's remind ourselves of what we've already been able to accomplish. It's a great little tool for that. It just kind of keeps people focused, kind of gets that energy revved back up again, kind of keeps them at the table. Working the pieces, kind of like the building block, except this is where your pieces are fairly separate and different. And you sort of work them like a puzzle. And so you'll work on one piece for a while, and then you'll ask, how does that fit in with this piece? And so it's kind of a puzzle approach like that. A little bit more complicated, but I've used it successfully in a lot of really different ways. So think about that, play with that. Your reading will have a little bit about that. Magic wand is one of my favorite. Something about being able to look at a person and go, you know what? Let's pretend for just a minute this is a magic wand. Let's pretend I give this to you, and then you can make whatever you want happen, happen. What would you do to solve this problem? Now you have to do that far enough along in the mediation where their first suggestion isn't, well, I'd make my neighbor move. By this point, they should realize that isn't an option. That's not what you're there for. And they'll use their magic wand more constructively. Cool little tool. Use it if you like it. See how it works. A couple of words about empathy. It's pretty common for people in conflict to want to get you on their side. That happens with some regularity. They want you to be their advocate. They figure that somehow if the mediator is appreciating my perspective, my opinion, more than the others, I'm going to get a better deal. And so they're going to pull you in that advocacy part. And you want to make a very clear distinction between empathy, the ability to feel with another person, the ability to understand what that must be like. That's an invaluable tool. That's an invaluable ability. You've got to be genuine when it comes to that, but being able to genuinely feel with that other person is really helpful in this setting. But watch that line. Watch the line between empathy and advocacy. There are times when you might need to say to somebody who's not quite getting it, look, I want to understand. I want to get what it is you're going through. I want to get what it's like to live there. I want to get the frustration that you bring to this, but I can't be your advocate. I can't be on your side. And sometimes you have to just be that clear and you have to tell them that's the way it looks. Reality check. In the end, we're going to talk about this when it comes to writing an agreement, but in the end, you're responsible for a good agreement. The parties are not the ones that are responsible for writing that good agreement and writing one that will stand the test of time and that will work. The reality check is, wait a minute, I know you guys said you could do this, but you got to help me understand how that works, because I've been listening to you for 45 minutes and I just don't see how this is, you got to help me understand it. And so you're the one that raises the appropriate questions. Does the check with the reality, is this really going to work? So there you go. Not too many slides, pretty quick in and out on it. This is a critically important part of the mediation. Just because I don't have a whole lot of slides around this, don't sell it short. This is the part where if you don't have good options, you don't have a good solution, and you don't have a good mediation. It's like that positions to interest. You don't do it right, you won't be successful. So take some time to go through that. Think about that. Sort of combine the slides with what you're reading. And if you have any questions, let me know. Anyway, good luck. Enjoy the option generating phase. Thanks.